Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session. We really appreciate you being here. My name is Justin Seeley, and I'm going to be taking you through a lot of preamble here, and then we'll get into some introductions, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation that you came for. So, basically, the context of today is that we know that a lot of organizations out there are still running a lot of their learning platforms on what you would call quote unquote legacy systems, things that have been around for a while, things that were designed in a different era. And it might be holding them back. It probably is holding them back in many respects, especially with a lot of the new technologies and things that have come about in the last even the last 3 to 5 years. Goodness, everything has really kind of exploded in the learning space in terms of what is capable or what is possible. Excuse me. So I want to start with the learner before we get going here and just kind of set some context because we recently did a study with Forrester, we being Adobe, and we learned that 40% of learning programs fail to meet their business objectives, and about 80% of existing tools lack the features that are needed to, in the minds of the learner, manage learning effectively. So what that means is that learners aren't getting what they need, experiences that are timely, relevant, and tailored to their role. And we hear this all the time across our customer base. When I go to events and things like that, I hear it all the time. Employees, customers, partners, they're overwhelmed by the fact that the content doesn't feel useful or that they can't find what they're looking for when they actually need it. And on the admin side, the burden is even heavier in many cases. Having been someone who's led large scale learning programs before, I can tell you that managing these platforms takes more time and effort than it really should. And even something as simple as assigning training, tracking completions, or pulling reports, it can feel very arduous and painful, I guess is a good way to put it. But many learning teams end up working around that platform and not with it. They have to find workarounds or tricks or do automations through third parties. And that then there's the cost. It's not just a licensing fee, but it's the cumulative cost of inefficiency, manual processes, duplicate systems, support tickets, lost time. And according to our recent total economic impact study that we did by Forrester, companies that moved to Adobe Learning Manager saw a 1.8 million in productivity gains and 60% time savings on administration work. Even just retiring that legacy platform could lead to as much as a $500,000 in cost savings. So these are all really big improvements just from moving off of one of those old systems and getting a more modern tech stack involved in the situation. So today's conversation isn't necessarily about bells and whistles. It's about building a learning ecosystem that actually works for your people, for your operations, and for your bottom line, quite frankly. And we're fortunate enough to have somebody that has firsthand experience with moving from one of those legacy systems to a modern tech stack in Adobe Learning Manager. So I want to introduce Lauren Sullivan from MathWorks. She helped guide her organization through this exact transition from that old system to a modern, scalable learning platform. And she's here to share with us what the process looked like, what she learned along the way, and what advice she would give to any of you guys that might be going on the same journey or thinking about kind of, starting this big process. So before we dive in, I want to start with some introductions. So again, my name is Justin Seeley, if you don't know me. I'm the e-learning evangelist here at Adobe, specifically working on the Adobe Learning Manager team, and I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm joined again by Lauren Sullivan. She's the IT training team manager at MathWorks. And if you're not familiar with MathWorks, they're a leading developer of mathematical computing software. Engineers and scientists around the world rely on their tools like MATLAB and Simulink to accelerate the pace of discovery, innovation, and development. So Lauren leads the team that's responsible for enabling learning and skill development across that org, and she's played a key role in their recent transformation to Adobe Learning Manager. So Lauren, let's start off a little bit about you, your background, your learning culture at MathWorks, how the team is structured, all that kind of stuff. Take it away.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Adobe, for having me. I'm going to introduce myself with a little bit of a nice visual here. So it just started sharing my screen. And in a moment, hopefully you see our lovely headquarters in Natick, Massachusetts popping up on your screen. This is a spring picture. They take seasonal pictures of our campus. It's very nicely landscaped and all that. But like I said, we're in Massachusetts. As Justin mentioned, we are a software engineering company. So you could say we know a bit about software, and with that, we have plenty of knowledgeable people who can help us with things like system rollouts and system adoptions. We also have plenty of people who are happy to complain about software when it's not up to their own standards. So there's a high bar for selecting a system to be rolled out at MathWorks, and we're very happy to be using Adobe Learning Manager now. So as Justin mentioned, I'm going to explain a little bit about the learning and development groups here at MathWorks. We're actually a decentralized organization, and we support our 7,000 plus employees across over 30 offices worldwide. Our headquarters that you see in this image is here in Massachusetts. We have about 3,000 people across 2 campuses that are right down the street from each other, and the rest of our staff is spread across the globe. So our internal learning groups, there's a lot of us, and we're working really hard to make sure that our employees are educated, they know how to get their jobs done, they know everything about our products to be able to enable our customers. So we heavily leverage the LMS. Justin mentioned that I manage the IT training team, so we're nested within IT, naturally. We also have HR training, and between these 2 groups, our audience is really the entire MathWorks organization. So anyone in any group is using our IT systems. Anyone could be taking an HR training, something on soft skills, something on management, coaching, that sort of topic is relevant to every employee. And then we also have a couple of major specialization training groups. Those are the development training organization and the sales training organization. As you can imagine, they are focused on development, so making sure everyone has the skills to develop top-notch software that we deliver to our customers, and then sales, understanding how customers use our tools and making sure that we are selling in the appropriate manner. So being decentralized, when I started managing in 2019, there wasn't much cohesion. We had an LMS and we were kind of clunking along like it's just the tool we have, and the pain points were the pain points. We tried a little bit to get some interest in improving things, but we couldn't quite get that excitement together. And without a department, without a central organization, it was really hard to get momentum going, to get everyone united. So with that said, I sort of stepped in and started saying, hey, you know what? The system we have can bring us together. Let's actually take effort to improve things with our learning technology and work with what we've got and see where we go from there. So I'm sure Justin and I will get into a lot of information here about how we ultimately made the decision to transition. But what really has brought us together over the past couple of years is evaluating options and deciding to go with Adobe Learning Manager. And we just rolled out at the end of May to our users worldwide. So happy to talk to you, Justin. Any questions that users have here, any of the attendees have, happy to talk more about our transition. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that important context. I appreciate it. Before we talk about solutioning, though, I think let's talk about the challenges that we face with legacy platforms. I think we have to start with the very real pain point that a lot of organizations, probably like MathWorks and many others, still face with their current learning platform. And these systems were often built in a different era, a different time, before remote work was the thing, before distributed teams like yours were a thing, before learning had to happen across multiple devices and operating systems and all these things, and before really and truly personalization became the baseline expectation for, a learner. We hear the same challenges repeatedly when we talk to our customers or potential customers, is that clunky admin workflows, limited learner engagement, and platforms that make simple tasks feel way more complicated than they should be. Even when the intent's there, the experience often falls short, but for the both for the learner and for the learning team. But it's one thing to talk about those issues in the abstract, and it's another one to actually live through them. So, Lauren, I want to start by talking about you, and if you could share what that ecosystem looked like in your world before you made the decision to move to something else. So what actually was going on at MathWorks that made you think, oh man, it's time for a change?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I'll say in a nutshell, what made me realize it's time for a change is that when I started managing the IT training team, I also took ownership of the LMS. So then I started hearing all the complaints. So that being, wow, this is a theme and people keep coming to me with the same thing over and over, maybe time for a change. But to get back to what you were saying about older systems and just being built differently, ours was extremely admin heavy, meaning not just us as learning and development staff, but actual technical administrators of the system we almost had to do everything through them. We couldn't manage certain things in user profiles. We couldn't manage certain permissions. And actually some level of integrations and anything we might want to customize on the system ourselves had to go through the vendor and required a project, a contract, a cost, all of that. So there was no flexibility in our old system. And
Mm.
you spoke earlier about cost, not just the contract, not just the licenses, but the cost of the time that you're spending. So if we have to go through our technical team to manage permissions for a couple of new users, new staff here, that's a waste of time. That's a waste of their abilities, and they're doing a really low level task that we would love to do ourselves and simply couldn't in our old system.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've definitely run across in my travels as well. A lot of these old systems are very manual. A lot of them do require a lot of specialized, workarounds or integrations or something that you can't do yourself. You wind up having to hold things together, as I used to say, with spit and bubble gum, and it's just, it becomes a headache in and of itself. And quite
Yeah.
honestly, you also almost feel like, I think at times, like every time you turn to them and ask for something else, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, "Wait, how many times can I call in a favor here? And
Right.
why should I have to? You know what I mean?"
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things also, I think the friction that's created for the admin, I think that's pretty obvious. Were there anything specifically that learners were upset about or that caused them friction with your old system?
Mhm. Yeah, we had a lot of repetitive issues that learners would report. So, for example, we had a lot of people saying, "Hey, I've completed this, but it's not registering my completion," which sounds
Mm,
like a small problem on an individual level. We can go in and mark that complete. But if that keeps happening over and over again, and if we're reporting these issues to the vendor and they're not getting resolved, then it's a massive pain point. And again, that adds up to time, which adds up to cost. So
sure.
learners had that issue. Learners also would frequently ask, "Hey, I have learning over here. I have learning over here," if they have different sources. So
Mm,
I spoke earlier about our decentralized training model. We also, across each of our groups, someone may have gone out and purchased a content provider or purchased a subscription to some sort of learning, and their users were using that. And then they're coming to us saying, "Hey, I would love that to be integrated." And we first of all weren't aware they were using another tool. We hadn't been really working together on those things. But
right.
second of all, we again didn't really have the option of creating our own integration. We would have had to pay for that and scope out a project with the vendor, even though our staff here, our technical and our admin staff, were perfectly capable of configuring the integration on our own if we needed to.
Got it. And so I think, I think we understand why the change was necessary at this point. But as you were looking to make that change, how did Adobe Learning Manager come into the picture originally for you? Is it something that you've used in the past? Was it something that somebody, brought to your attention? Like what, how did it come into play?
Yeah, actually, someone else brought it to my attention. So when we first realized that we were going to look for a new LMS, it was many years in the making. It wasn't just like we decided overnight to get a new LMS and got approval to do that. We had to build a
Yeah.
case. We had to say, like, this is why we're moving and do some preliminary investigation to say this is what other platforms are offering that could help us. So Adobe came up at when we were starting to gather options for our vendor evaluation phase. We use other Adobe products here at MathWorks. So it just made sense. Someone said, "Hey, Adobe has an LMS. Why don't you take a look at that?" And because we already have a relationship with Adobe, because they're a well-known vendor, it just made sense to include in our evaluation. Obviously, we made the cut in the end.
And we're very happy we did. So as
Mhm.
you were looking at these platforms, I'm sure that there were new issues that came up along the way. So how did your needs evolve, or if they did at all, during this project, versus what you were originally looking for? I know you're trying to solve like some of those very high visibility pain points, but did your needs evolve along the way as you were looking for an LMS? And how,
Yeah.
if at all, was ALM, able to meet those expectations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm wondering actually if our needs evolved or if we just discovered more about our needs over time,
Ah,
which actually might be a bit more accurate. So when we first went into this, I mentioned that we took quite some time to justify the need to moving it to a new LMS.
Sure.
What we did was we actually gathered managers of our different teams plus people from our teams who heavily use the LMS. We gathered together and we just put all our pain points on stickies. We're like,
Mm.
this is great, get it out, kind of
Yeah.
rant a little bit, feel good about sympathizing with others and getting your pain points out. And we took all those, we prioritized them, and we turned the pain points into requirements. So, of course, requirements can't only be made up of pain points of the current state. You need some basic
Sure.
stuff. And, I wouldn't say that our old system did everything poorly. There was a lot that it did well. So,
Sure.
we needed to kind of reconcile that. What do we like about our old system? What is going well? And what would we consider a core piece of what we need in a system going forward? And then what are those pain points that we really don't want to have to live with anymore? So we started out really just from the pain points, saying like, I can't take this anymore. We have to move on. Flip those into requirements. We use those for our initial reach out to vendors. We did kind of a phase one where we had a much longer list of vendors based on their responses. Like, do you have this requirement? Do you meet this need? We
Mm.
narrowed that down to a shorter list. And then from there, we actually created scripts. We worked with each vendor to create scripts that they could go through in a demo that used our exact use cases. Many of the vendors asked us for including Adobe, asked us for samples of our content so that we could see our actual content in the LMS and what that experience would be. And those demos, I will say, watching those demos and seeing them go through requirement by requirement in the scripts that we had written, every single one of us was like, oh, we didn't ask about that. Oh, wait, that actually brings up another question. Oh, I wonder how that works with this other thing.
Right.
So again, it wasn't really that our requirements evolved, but I think just seeing the product and actually seeing it live and what people can do with it makes you think of everything else that you might have been missing in your initial requirements list.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you never know the right questions to ask until you actually get hands-on with something. Anytime I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning something new or anything like that, I try not to, especially when I was doing procurement for new LMSs at previous places where I worked. My process is very similar to yours. We call the gathering of all the stakeholders and everybody, we called those rage sessions.
Yes.
And so, it's very helpful to just tell people this is a safe space to just tell us everything that you
Yeah.
absolutely hate about this. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and there
Yeah.
there are some other colorful words that I think people use for these things, but I just
Yes.
called it a rage session, and we would do it on either dry erase boards or when we were completely remote at some places we would do it through
Mm-hmm.
like whiteboarding apps and things like that. But it was very helpful. I think it helped people focus on the issues that really mattered. There were a lot of like nitpicky things that, people would write down, but we could automatically just kind of put those in like a nice to have pile. But we really focused on the things that were universally upsetting people, I guess is the best way to put it. So,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
well, so as that process starts, where you're bringing everybody together and everything, you start in this kind of three-part um, sequence, I guess, is the best way to
Mm-hmm.
put it. And making the decision to move away from an older LMS, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the first thing you do is say, okay, we have to make this move. But the evaluation, the selection, and then the migration process, that's kind of where the meat and potatoes of all of this really comes to fruition. So this is where a lot of organizations get stuck, I think. There's pressure to find some sort of future ready platform that meets the needs of every stakeholder and migrates seamlessly without disrupting the business. I mean, we hear these terms all the time. The truth is, not every stakeholder is going to get everything they want. It's not
Yeah.
going to be completely seamless without disrupting something along
Mm-hmm.
the way. But, at Adobe, we've seen this play out across our customers. And the ones who succeed, those are the ones that treat this process more like a technical upgrade, where they focus on designing the right experience for learners, for admins, and for the business. So I want to zoom in on that decision-making journey a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. So how did you choose the right partner? What does a thoughtful migration plan look like? How does that, Adobe Learning Manager ultimately become the best fit? But we'll dive into all of this. But what were the big things that helped you get buy-in from multiple levels? Because I think, that's something that I've
Mm-hmm.
heard both in our conversations before this and also from people internally here at Adobe. You guys were able to get a lot of people on board and stay on board. Like people are still kind of high on it. So what was that? What do you think was the glue that held all that together?
Yes. So MathWorks is a very feedback heavy company. That's a double-edged sword. It means that you can be very transparent with people. You can give a lot of input and you actually get a lot of input back. But that also means that decision making often gets stuck in the too many cooks in the kitchen situation.
Yeah.
So I was very mindful of that. And I also knew here at MathWorks anyway, persistence and time was going to be a big reason for us, or big thing for us to consider when we were making this decision. So I mentioned a moment ago that when I started managing the IT training team in 2019, I took over ownership of our previous system. At that time, we actually had the appetite to look at different options. We wanted to do an LMS evaluation project, but we were up at, I think, a year and a half on our other contract. And our steering team, rightfully so, said, do you have time to do this? Do you have time to thoroughly investigate other options and select a different one and implement it before we lose access to our current system? And our current vendor, they weren't going to let us renew for just 1 year. It just wasn't going to happen. So that actually worked in our favor. At the time, I remember being disappointed that we were just going to have to stick with our system and not really move on with the project. But it also ended up working out really well because we ended up renewing. We ended up putting a ton of effort into improving our system as much as possible. We had a couple of consultants that we worked with. Internally, we have a lot of experts across our learning and development groups who were using the system day in, day out. They were investigating different workflows, different ways to carry out any of the admin tasks that we had. We were interviewing learners about things that they might want to see enabled, and we were checking that against the roadmap and the feature releases of our previous vendor. So we had about 3 years of dedicated effort to improve when we finally said, okay, you know what, we do need to look at an LMS, because here's everything we tried and we are still at this lower level of satisfaction, and we are still paying a premium for a legacy platform that's not delivering on our needs and still facing these pain points on both the learner and admin side. So having all of that, when we came back to our steering team, when we came back to our VPs who were going to ultimately approve a project to look at a new system, they had that history. They knew the work that we had done, and they saw how we had actually proven, like, this is the right direction. We're not just doing this willy-nilly. We are actually investigating and investing in our platform, and we can't continue with what we have. So that was a lot of effort over time. But I would say if you had to boil it down to one thing, I'm a huge proponent of change management, and it's just the idea of bringing everyone in, bringing the sponsors in, getting everyone focused on a single goal. We really coordinated that across our learning and development teams, and we were all super invested in this and very excited and wanting to move on. And I think that helped our case too, just seeing this core group of users of the systems is all in on a new platform. We want to move on. So just getting all the people on the same page really was it.
Yeah, and I think, when you go to that next level to talk to, whoever that might be, whether it's a VP or, a director, whoever, I think that's a very unique, I think the way you guys did it is a unique approach, because I've led a couple of initiatives like this in the past, and I don't think we came as maybe buttoned up as you guys did the few times that I had to do this. So I think that probably did make a huge difference, because I know if I'm, in charge of evaluating the need for some sort of major change like that, having all of that data come to me to say, like, here's what we did, here's what it cost, and here's where we still are. That had to be a really compelling narrative for everybody that was looking at it.
Yeah. I actually, internally, we've joked that it was the fastest approved business case in the history of our department. And I'm proud of that. Like,
yeah,
we
you
had
should be.
a case that you couldn't deny. Like, it was sealed up.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So once you guys got started, and you've gone forward, what was the tipping point for you guys that made you want to make the switch to Adobe Learning Manager? Like that final cut, what did that final cut round look like?
Yeah. So it was really tight. And, I have to say, like, there's some excellent platforms out there, and it really depends on your needs and what your company does with the LMS and where you want to go. I mentioned before, like we really want to be able to customize. We are a software company. We want to
Yeah,
build. We want to do things that meet our use case internally, and we want to be able to do it ourselves. We
sure.
obviously need to leverage a vendor to support us with their core platform and to support us with feature releases. We really appreciate the relationship so far with Adobe being listening to us as a customer and working with us. But we also just really like to tinker and we like to customize things. So we were super pumped about how open, I guess you could say, Adobe Learning Manager is in the sense of integration. And hey, if one day we want to do a headless LMS, that was
Mhm.
something I hadn't even heard of until Adobe Learning Summit last year. And I actually traveled with a member of our development training team who was a developer himself and got into learning and development. And as soon as he heard about a headless LMS, his ears, I could just see him be like, what? What's
Uh,
that? Like, is that a future state for us? So for people on the call who maybe don't know, that is essentially where the LMS is your back end, but you can put little widgets and integrate it into all sorts of things on your intranet. So that super intrigues us. Like we would love to be able to eventually get there. We did just implement like a quarter ago, so we'll calm down for a minute. But we're really excited about the future potential of Adobe, about it being something that we could build off of, that we can customize for our needs if we want to.
yeah.
And I think over time, it just seems like that script I mentioned when we had the demos and we said, hey, that script was great, but that just made me think of a million other questions. Every time we asked those questions, Adobe came back with an answer, and it was good to see. I will say too, like the customer experience has been really fantastic. Everyone has seemed interested in our questions and not just going through the motions. We
Yeah.
were joking, I wonder how many of these people during sales are super attentive and then after you implement kind of fade away, but you haven't faded away at all. If anything, you've gotten more engaged, and that's really encouraging. And that was definitely lacking in our last platform. So we're happy to be your customer and happy to see where our future goes.
That's fantastic. And thank you for sharing that because I think that's just something I was super interested in. I know that wasn't really on our on
That's
our
okay.
list, but I just wanted to know because it's always interesting to me to hear, what the use case is and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny you say
Mm-hmm.
headless because I was at another company before I was at Adobe, and we were implementing a headless content management system, not learning management system, for a knowledge base. And I was amazed at how freeing that was to just have
Yeah.
total control over everything, the way it looked, the way it feels, and to integrate it into existing
Mm-hmm.
systems and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
for those people who are on the call, like Lauren said, who don't know a lot about headless, basically you could have like your own intranet or your own website, marketing website, whatever, and you can insert educational interventions directly in the content you already have, which would A, meet the learner where they are, and B, allow you to control messaging, look, feel, brand, all of that stuff all in one. And that's something that I think is super powerful, especially to people who are very interested in doing that tinkering work because there's endless possibilities if you go down that road.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
um, okay, let's talk about the migration. So once we've made the call to go with Adobe Learning Manager, I want to know during the migration, was there anything that didn't go to plan? And if so, what did you learn from that?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think we at MathWorks we have a term. It's an industry term, but MVP, so minimum viable product. If you're not familiar
Yep.
with that, it basically means what's the bare minimum requirements that we would need for this to go live, whatever it is, the project, the system, anything. So our MVP, we tried to be really conscious of what we were including there. Being in IT, I've worked on a lot of implementation projects where oops, MVP is going to take a lot longer than we thought. Or in order to meet our deadline, we'll have to cut stuff out. And
Right.
in this case, we were ready to implement Adobe Learning Manager. We had to wait for contracts to be signed, for all sorts of things to happen. So by the time we got started, we only had about 4.5 months left on our last contract. By the time we like hit the ground running with implementation, so we couldn't afford to change the timeline of our implementation. We had to implement on time based on our original deadline. So
Mhm.
with that in mind, I wanted to make sure that we're not committing to anything that we definitely can't deliver. That did end up being a hiccup despite the planning.
Right.
But we stayed, I mentioned it before, like engaging the people that need to be involved. We were super engaged with our steering team, with the management teams across our groups. We had monthly meetings with steering and management, but we also had weekly meetings with just management. We had, I think, 3 times a week dedicated core team meetings where we sorted through everything, and we kept people informed. So when we got to a point where we said, hey, this is probably not going to be ready, but we're going to bump it to post go live,
Yeah.
or this feature is actually going to take a bit more coordination, it should be its own project later. We were having those conversations as we went so that if we were changing plans, at least steering wasn't feeling disappointed or like they didn't get what they had approved or anything like that. Luckily, we didn't have to do any sort of large sacrificing, but there were some things where we're like, yep, we'll get to that after go live, and that's just where we are today, pretty much, implementing all the stuff that we had to move out past our implementation date.
Got it. Well, I think that's something that is very important. The communication between you and the other teams that are involved, other people that are involved, that's just something you cannot sacrifice on. I've
Mm-hmm.
been places where development happened in the dark and things shipped, and you get your quote unquote finished product, and you look at it, and
Yeah,
10, 15 things that were on your
right.
must-have list didn't make it. That's hugely disheartening for
Yeah,
anybody that worked on it, right? So I think
yeah.
keeping people informed, having those regular cadence meetings is so important, and then also
Mm-hmm.
allowing people to have input as well, right? You were
Mm-hmm.
probably trying to get input from stakeholders with, you know, is it okay that we push this? Do we sacrifice something else to get this thing that's now at
Mm-hmm.
risk in there? Things like that. So were any of those conversations difficult to have when you were going through it?
We have one steering member that I was just thinking of while you were talking about this, and this also goes back to my comment earlier about MathWorks being very feedback heavy and that being a double-edged sword. So the steering member from our development training organization, he worked his way up to his position through learning and development. He was a trainer, and then
Okay.
he managed the training group, and then he got a different job, and now he's heading up like the entire department that includes development training. So he's like seriously progressed within the training domain, and he knows not only what it's like to manage the entire group, but he knows what it's like to be the one clicking through an LMS to upload your training. And he was super informative in terms of, hey, should we make this decision or that one? And he could actually give input based on how he knows the system is used by his users. So some of our other steering members, they've been up in their management positions, and they're very good at their job. They're good at hearing out kind of both sides of a story and helping guide us to a decision, but they don't know what it's like to actually have a SCORM file corrupt and need to be re-uploaded, and oops, it versioned and now it's reassigned to a million people. So
Yeah.
they don't understand that pain point. So this one steering team member, we had some difficult conversations with him. Like, he's very understanding, and he was not at all like mad at us or anything, but in some cases he actually kind of just was like, give it to me straight. Are we going to have this feature at go live, or is it going to be later? And if it's going to be later, what is the trade-off? What are we including? Is there something else we could include? And he would give his input if he felt that a feature that we were trading out was actually worth keeping in, and perhaps we can trade that other thing out. So I would say difficult conversations in that you're just managing expectations of someone who has big influence across our organization. But at the end of the day, he was providing advice and he was being very helpful. So we got through it with his support and also with his very pointed questions.
See, trainers are the unsung heroes of any
Right.
organization. Said that for many years. Uh, no, but I think that's great. I think that having someone who is a true practitioner involved
Mm-hmm.
in decisions like this is extremely helpful, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that those people, like you say, they bring a unique perspective about those ultra niche technical issues
Mm-hmm.
that they can really drill down on and tell you why this is something that needs to ship, because on the surface it might not seem so, right, to an executive or somebody else who's really not in the day to day. They might not understand why the ability to
Mm-hmm.
properly managed versioned SCORM files is a big deal, but it is, and
Right.
we understand that because we work in it every day. So I think that that's super important. um
Mm-hmm.
so in terms of and I assume probably you guys had some sort of um I don't know, with like an outline or a plan that went along with this. And of course, plans change along the way. But is there anything that was in your quote unquote migration playbook that you don't think that I would find in like a vendor case study that ultimately made a huge difference
Mhm.
for you? Like, was there anything that's kind of like MathWorks centric that would help other people kind of, up their game when they're trying to go through this process?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily MathWorks centric, but we what we found most helpful actually when we first started working with Adobe and our implementation partner was a vocab lesson. So we had the consultants and Adobe actually learn our vocab of like what do you call a course, a curriculum, a learning assignment, like that sort of word is very specific. And then
Yes.
when you're suddenly in Adobe and you're talking about a learning path or a learning plan, what is that? I don't know. And if I just say course, are we talking about the same thing? So that was actually quite a learning curve. Like when we first started getting in there, someone's talking about uploading a course. And we realized over time, oh, no, you're talking about a learning path. And oh, you're
Mm,
talking about this. So it sounds silly, but that was probably a huge way to improve things was like level setting. This is what we mean. We actually had that at the very top. We have it pinned to our core team notes page, and we would just scroll up and refer to it if we needed to refresh ourselves. Like, oh yeah, this is what we're talking about here. That was also really helpful for I think the implementation partner as well to just know what we're
sure.
talking about. And for our Adobe Launch Advisory Services team, they were helping train us on the system once we started implementing it. Our person there was able to say like, oh, this is this, and that's what you refer to as a curriculum, by the way. So we're going to refer to it as this now, helping out with that sort of thing. So that was helpful. We definitely have MathWorks specific words internally that we use a lot, and getting that kind of laid out early was helpful.
Makes perfect sense. I think that
Mm-hmm.
a vocab lesson is extremely that's such a great way to put it.
Yeah.
As I have done this a couple times, that is always a huge friction point between
Mm-hmm.
you and your chosen partner or even stakeholders, right? Because stakeholders don't
Yeah.
know the difference between
Yeah.
like we had at the last place we had learning path, we had course, we had module. And
Mm-hmm.
in the module there were
Yep.
lessons and everything else. And so when I was speaking about learning strategy to upper management, and I would say learning plan that they had no idea what I was
Right.
talking about, and they would often mismatch the words. So even in the context of just like giving a presentation,
Mm-hmm.
I almost had to do a mini vocab lesson every time I spoke to them. I
Yeah.
eventually wound up saying like, "Gosh, I should just." So I created a infographic for it
Nice.
and sent it to them, and I just said, "Look, as a pre-read for this, like take a look at this," and I think that's
Ah,
extremely helpful because a shared language about this
yeah.
kind of stuff is really just like a baseline level set that you have to do every single time, I think.
Yeah. I totally agree. And then you had asked about like the migration or the overall
Yeah.
plan and all of that. We did have an assigned project manager who brought a wealth of expertise. That project management's not an area that I'm personally experienced in, so it was really good to have someone we could lean on to do that.
Same.
And he was super helpful with getting like we have an internal architecture team that's supposed to review technical solutions before they're implemented. And frankly, I didn't even know that.
Mm.
So that
Got
sort
it.
of thing was like, oh, just knowing that we have the right people in the room who can carry
Mhm.
out a role or responsibility that's really important to the project. That was also really important for us too.
Yeah, I can imagine so. I mean, having the
Mhm.
peace of mind of knowing that you've covered all bases, or at least as many of the bases as you've been able to identify. There's
Mm-hmm.
always something
Yeah.
that pops up at some point, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that's super
Yeah.
important. But so overall, was there a win from this migration process that ultimately it was a win, but maybe in the moment didn't really feel like a win at first? Was there anything that maybe at first you were kind of like, oh, geez, and then at the end you're like, yeah, you know what, that kind of worked out.
Let me think. Trying to think. I mean, other than what I already mentioned of like just the delay, not even a
Yeah,
delay, but like having the appetite to do this years ago and then finally
yeah,
getting around to it. Like I said, the ultimate win was that once we submitted the official business case, it was approved immediately.
right.
That was really good. Um,
I think that's a good
yeah,
example.
honestly, that's
I
a tough
mean,
question. I don't know if I have any other input for that.
well, I think you honestly did answer it because it is that process of
Yeah.
taking a step back saying, okay, we will go through that. Like in your mind, you're probably
Mhm.
like, okay, this is futile. Like I don't know why I'm doing this, but you did it
Mhm.
and you made it through
Yeah.
that process, and then you had all that data to back you up, and then it was that much easier. So ultimately, it was a win for you guys, but it was probably pretty
Yeah.
painful to go back and have to do it all.
Yeah. 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 It was great. Yeah. Mhm.
All right, so as we round the bases and head for home here. Lauren, after hearing all of this, the people that are on this call might be wondering, like, what does a successful transition look like in practice? I think we've talked a lot about how you got there, what you did during the migration, and things like that. But once you're in it and once you've got everything going, like, what are the steps? How do you avoid the pitfalls, things like that? And at
Mhm.
Adobe, we work with organizations all over the place. They're moving away from these legacy platforms and they're adopting a more modern learning infrastructure. And over time, we've seen a clear pattern in what works, and we've captured that in the very simple framework. It's high level that's called the 3M approach: map, migrate, and manage. So I want to go through this process kind of with you and talk about what each phase looked like for you guys. And then and at the end, we'll talk about like some of your final thoughts about key results or anything like that that you've noticed so far. I know you guys are only a quarter in, but if there's anything that you want to share
Mhm.
about it, I'd love to hear it. So
Sure.
let's start with that first point, the map point, whereas it's our opportunity to assess the current and future needs, and this is where everything starts. So you need a clear-eyed look at your current state. So what are the things that you sat down and said, okay, these are the things that we need to do in order to properly assess this whole issue? We know people are frustrated with it, but what are those things? Was it just
Mhm.
that session with your stakeholders? Were there other things that you mapped out? What do people need to do in that map phase?
Yeah, so we did the session again that you meant, the rage
Yeah.
session. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Okay.
We also did some surveys. So we surveyed our learners, we surveyed the admins. They were anonymous and it was a random selection of people. It wasn't our entire company, but we just surveyed, hey, what have you seen? We actually deliberately surveyed new hires to MathWorks within the past year. We sent them a targeted survey that said, did your previous company use an LMS?
Uh-huh.
And what did you like about it? What is different? Is there anything that was on that you'd recommend here? That gave a lot of good input. That was good to hear, like, what are other people doing?
Right.
I also attended some conferences and some local networking events and all of that to just ask people, hey, what are you using? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And just get some ideas from people about what pain points are. And there's some things that's like, yeah, that's just how systems are, and you move on. And other people are like, oh yeah, we had that problem before, and like this system's way better now, and giving us kind of ideas of things that we could do on a system to improve, whether it's through some sort of customization and building a solution or just implementing a new system that doesn't have those pain points. So we really tried to gather input from our own learners and admins, the industry itself, other expertise in terms of conferences and all of that. And then from there, we just kind of compared all that. So, hey, does it seem like we're going to get these sorts of benefits and these sorts of things from a new system? How important are those? Is it worth the migration effort? Because it's not just the cost of the contract, it's also the amount of time that you spend implementing a new system. You have to justify the need
Sure.
for the project work too. So we just made sure that we had all of that. It's tough to get dollar amounts, I would say, during
Yeah.
just like evaluating. It's really hard to just get a ballpark of like, hey, how much would this cost? So we worked with an assumption based on a lot of other systems that we have here at MathWorks and based on just customer conversations and things. But other than that, we felt like we had requirements and potential of a different system pretty much worked out when we came to our stakeholders.
Got it. Yeah, I think this stage is really all about trying to align your business goals, your learning
Mm-hmm.
needs, identifying gaps, and
Yeah.
then kind of creating a roadmap for
Mm-hmm.
where you want your system to go, or what should it look like in the future. Do you have any
Mm-hmm.
long-term goals with your system? Like what
Yeah.
goals are you trying to hit?
So actually, it's funny you mentioned that because I one of the best things when you ask that question about a surprise that went better than planned, I would say the opposite. Like one of the things that I was not exactly excited about that has become an amazing thing is the collaboration between our learning and development groups. So again, decentralized. The only thing that brings us together is the LMS. But now, out of this implementation, everyone is like, so what do we do now? Like, what's next? What can we implement? And We have our first ever learning and development strategy session coming up in September, where we're actually going to put together like a plan for our organization, even though we're not really an official one. We're going to collaborate more going forward. So I know on that list we want to check out Adobe's AI features. We're really interested in building like a reporting suite. We'd like to integrate with our current data marts and get some of the Adobe learning data in there.
Sure.
And I know we're really interested in skills. So
Yeah,
haven't done the work yet. We're going to prioritize where we start. That's all a lot to bite off at one time.
it
We're
is.
probably not going to be
It
able to do
is.
that, but there's momentum and there's excitement, and I think everyone's seeing like, oh, we can work really well together, and we're looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, for you and anyone else who may be on the coming to, Learning Summit in Vegas, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you'll see some new things that'll help you do some of those things.
Ooh,
I don't
that'd be
know.
exciting. Yep.
You kind of got to come out and see it for yourself. So,
Yeah,
wink,
I'll be
wink,
there.
nudge, nudge. Okay. So once we've mapped it out, we've picked our solution from, vetting everything. Want to go into the second phase of this, which is the migrate phase, which we say is like executing a thoughtful transition. So once the plan is in place, the next step is kind of doing it and doing it right. So take us through, what the migration process looked like. How involved was the team at Adobe? What did that process look like? What did that partnership look like?
Mhm.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. So our process was very methodical, and we again leaned on our internal project manager who has done a lot of system implementations. We also leaned on both Adobe and our implementation partner who had done a lot of migrations before, and they sort of provided a script that was very flexible, but also a nice way for us to follow a plan.
Okay.
So for I would say content migration, of course, is the bulk of the stuff we're
Yes.
migrating, like settings and all that. We pre-configured the system with the settings that we thought made the most sense. At the time, we had added ourselves in as users, but no one else from MathWorks, so we weren't spamming people with email by accident or anything.
Sure.
And then to migrate content, we actually chose like bits of content. So we would have a catalog, for example, that we would migrate over. The implementation partner did the actual technical work of the migration. And then we would meet and validate. So we would go through and say, does this look like you want it to? And each of our groups would take little bits of content that we own and validate, are the fields all accurate? Did the owner of the content migrate? Their name came over. Is this link working? Is this PDF attached? All sorts of things like that. So we did it bit by bit to get started, to make sure that the scripts and everything were running properly. And then we did our final bulk migration towards the end. But the day we went live with Adobe, I mentioned that we were coming up on the end of our previous LMS contract. We
Yeah.
had about a month left in the previous contract when we went live with Adobe. But for all intents and purposes, for MathWorks staff, our old system was gone. So we completely shut off access. And we said, let's use this month as a buffer. If someone reaches out and says, I'm missing something or I can't find this, we have the previous LMS as a failsafe.
Right.
And we did just after migration, we did one final pull to kind of copy back anything that may have been done in that last week when we were implementing the new system, but still had access to the old one. So all of that, it was just kind of piecemeal and validating as you go. That was really helpful. And we also expanded our team. Like we have our core team that implemented Adobe Learning Manager, but we also had an extended team, which is people from our different training groups who were helping us basically go in there, check, does that look good? Does that content translate? Did it come out right? There's no weird characters in the description or anything like that. And people were just going through and validating. And we also we're very lucky to have an internal QE department in IT. So they were helping us to ensure that any of the workflows that we migrated or the assignment process, all of that was actually working as well. We leaned on them too.
Got it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then once you were live, obviously now you're in the last phase of our three-step process here. You're in the manage phase, the operate and future-proof your
Mhm.
learning strategy phase. So, once a launch is out there, whether it's good, bad, or anything, the real
Mhm.
value I think comes in operating these systems long term. So what advice or what is your process going to be for managing this system moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we actually are still meeting weekly as a core team. I mentioned earlier that we were meeting multiple times a week. Now we're down to once a week. We have once a week meetings with all the internal core team. We have a once a week meeting with two of our Adobe points of contact. And it's great. We meet as a core team first, and then the next day we meet with Adobe. So if something comes out of the core team meeting, a question, something that we'd like to put in as an enhancement request, we can talk to them immediately, and they can help us triage that. We also, like I said, we're going to have our strategy meeting coming up. So I think we're going to have a lot more projects coming out of learning and development, which is awesome. But other than that, one of the benefits I haven't touched upon yet actually is that we were able to really streamline our operations and admin work. So at the beginning with us talking, you had asked me about some of the pain points of our old system. And I mentioned that we
Yeah.
had to go through the technical team, or we had to go through the vendor to implement some things that we felt we could implement on our own. I just canceled my one-on-one series with the technical team because we don't need it anymore. Because
Hey.
we can do it ourselves. Like, we can actually work in the system and we can make the changes that we need. And we'll only bother them if we have like an actual big technical project where we need their expertise. So they are super happy to not be bothered by help tickets and requests from us, asking for small, minute things. And we have set up a new help queue that has our learning and development staff. So we go through our internal help system. So if someone has a question, it doesn't go to the technical team anymore. It comes right to us. And it's 90% of the time, their question is, hey, I accidentally enrolled in this. Can you move me to a new session? That sort of thing that we can handle. So saving the time and the expertise of the technical people to deal with what they need to, having this new group that meets regularly and has this new system that we're all familiar with because we just implemented it together, and we're going to continue working together in an operations sense. I think we're going to have some really good momentum and keep things going from here.
Fantastic. So I think, whether you're just at the beginning of evaluating your options or if you're even in the middle of the process, I think this 3M framework, this map, migrate, and manage framework. I think it's very simple. Like I said, it's high level, but it's very simple to follow. And I think that that is a nice, repeatable way to move away from these legacy pain points into more of these modern learning tech stacks. So I want to we're going to open it up to Q&A in about 90 seconds. But Lauren, is there anything that result wise or anything you've seen since you've been going live, any big wins or anything like that you've heard, like learner feedback or anything like that?
Um, Overall, overwhelmingly, people just love the UI. And it's so funny how big a deal that is. But the
Yeah.
constant feedback we got on the old system was, this system looks old. And it did. Like, the font, the graphics, it was like, it's just not pretty. Like, why would you
Right.
want to use that? And now people are like, it's so clean, it's so modern, like all that. And it's such a huge impact on our users, like the learners,
Yeah,
that it just makes everything better. Like, you log in, you're like, oh, this is so refreshing,
absolutely.
instead of the old thing we used to see, the old clunky thing. So
I,
yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's
Mhm.
amazing how much visuals can impact the learner
Yeah.
experience. I mean, the one thing
Yeah.
that I always the one thing that I always had in mind when I was doing learning at some of the big companies where I worked was, how can we make this more immersive? How can we make this feel
Mhm.
more new, that kind of thing. And when I started here at Adobe and I went through onboarding, I can honestly tell you it was the best onboarding experience I've ever had at a company, and I've gone through a
Oh.
few. But
Mhm.
I think the thing that really kicked it for me was the player. The fluidic player
Mm.
in ALM, the way
Yes.
that it, no matter what the content is, video, PDF, PowerPoint, doesn't
Mhm.
matter, it's the same UI. Load it up.
Yes.
There's no pop-up windows. It doesn't feel like an
Mhm.
old course that, all that stuff. And you just stay right there. The controls change based on what you're looking at. So if it's a video, you
Yes.
get video controls. PowerPoint, you get PowerPoint control, all that stuff. And
Mhm.
that for
Yes.
me made it such a frictionless experience that I zoomed through a lot of my onboarding
Yeah.
in a way that I probably wouldn't have before. So
Yep.
it makes a
True.
difference. I know people, kind of you know, uh, I don't know what the proper word is, but they don't put enough emphasis on design and things like that. But it's
Mhm.
true. It has a big impact on
Mhm.
folks. So,
It does.
okay,
Yeah.
I have a question here
Okay.
from Rose. My company moved away from Cornerstone back in 2021 to have our own in-house homemade LMS. Many things are limited and very manual for our learning team. What would you sum up as the three major things such an LMS would need? For example, we don't have user profiles or variable hashtag slash search systems at this time. So, what are three
Mhm.
things that are must have on an LMS for you, Lauren?
Ooh, user profiles is a pretty big deal.
It is a pretty big deal.
um,
It is a pretty big
I would say that we use that a lot. We target training to people based on their role or based on other characteristics. As I mentioned, we want to get into skills. We would like to implement skills here. That's going to be a huge addition to user profiles and user
Sure.
selection. Um, I think you opened this webinar talking, Justin, about targeting training and making sure that users are getting the learning they need, not just like a big repository of training for anyone.
Yeah.
So any method of targeting, if it's not a user profile, can people select topics? Can managers propose topics for their staff? That sort of thing would be definitely needed for me. Um, I don't know if the profile includes hierarchy, but we use that a lot too. So we'll assign to specific groups based on the org structure, and we just need to have that in there. So kind of an integration with Active Directory or with your HRIS system, that would probably be necessary for that. Um, yeah. Do you have any ideas, Justin? What would you say?
I think I agree with you. User profiles is huge. I think
Mm-hmm.
in the age that we live in, personalized learning is a must these days.
Mm-hmm.
We're spoiled by things like Netflix and
Yeah.
Instacart or whatever it is, where we log in and it's like, oh, it knows the brand of avocados I buy automatically. Here it is telling me it's on
Right.
sale. You know what I mean? Or it's like, oh, we know Justin binge watches true crime. Here's 50 true crime documentaries and I think that's one of the things that learners expect too. Yes, there's going to be things that are
Yeah.
assigned to you. Yes, there's going to be things that are mandated. But also, when you go to these platforms, like you want to see stuff that is relevant to you, relevant to your role. How do I get, you mentioned the training manager that had grown his career at MathWorks by doing training. How do I do that? It's not always,
Mm-hmm.
cut and dry, what
Right.
the pathway is, what the
Yeah.
skills are you need to acquire. And so I think that's a huge win for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. I'm biased, of course, but I think we do a pretty good job of the course recommendations based on user interests and roles and products. And I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
something that is ultimately a huge deal for people these days. So,
Yeah.
um, I would also say I
I
don't know what else you're missing, but like I don't know, robust assessment. I think the ability to actually validate skill acquisition, things like that. You know.
Yep. Yeah. So I see that Rose, who asked the question, has clarified in the chat that
Okay.
there's just it look. I'm focusing actually, Rose, on your use of the word manual, very manual. So I would say anything I can do to automate something or to make it less manual is always a priority of mine. I have someone on my team who actually jokes that he would love to automate himself out of a job one day, and he is like the person I go to when I'm like, this annoys me. I have to click 8 times. Why? And he will just dive right in. Like he wants to make it less clicky. He's fixed a lot of stuff, and I think automation too. If you're my background is not technical, and the word automation to me sometimes means like, oh, building a technical solution that does this for me. But you can automate a manual task by even just simplifying the fields you fill out or just going through the process start to finish and being like, is there some waste here that we can just get rid of? And maybe streamline is a better word than automate. But anything manual, I would say figure out what you were most annoyed by, go into one of those rage sessions that Justin promoted earlier,
Right.
and figure out what your biggest pain points are. And that might be something that you prioritize.
Fabulous. Well, I think we are running out of time, unfortunately. If you have any other questions for me or for Lauren, we're both on LinkedIn. You can find us pretty easily over there. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them our way. Also, if you want to check out Adobe Learning Manager, you can go to learningmanager.adobe.com. You can try it free for 30 days. Take a look at it, take it for a spin. Let us know what you think. Lauren, any other things that you want to plug, promote, or otherwise let people know about before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. Just if anyone's going to Adobe Learning Summit, see you there. I'll see you there,
Absolutely.
Justin.
Gonna be
Yeah.
a blast. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not much of a party animal, but I do like Las Vegas. We'll see.
That's Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Lauren, thank you so much for your time and all of your great insights. We really appreciate that as well. And we hope to see you again here for a future webinar with all of us at Adobe. So thanks, everybody.